morning and turn to Matthew chapter 10. We're going to begin in Matthew chapter 10 this morning. We have been studying the apostles, the disciples of Jesus, this summer, and we're almost halfway through. It's going along pretty quickly. And I had you turn here to Matthew chapter 10 because here in this passage we see a list of the disciples, and we're calling this study All the King's Men. So if you're there in Matthew chapter 10, we're going to look at just one of the lists that's recorded in the scriptures of the disciples. It says in Matthew 10, verse 2, "Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Labius, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him." So far, we have looked at Simon, who was called Peter, his brother Andrew, and then another set of brothers, James and John. And today we're going to consider the Apostle Philip. What does the Bible have to say about Philip? So I'm going to have you turn actually over to the Gospel of John, and we're going to look for the rest of the morning in the Gospel of John at what John records for us concerning Philip. We're going to look at John chapter 6. If I were to summarize the Apostle Philip in a sentence, it would be this: Philip was a man of little faith. Philip was a man of little faith. And we see that in the Gospel of John several times. Actually, there's more recorded about Philip in John than any other gospel. He does come up a little bit here and there, but most of the information that we have about him is found in this gospel. And so we're going to look here at a familiar passage. It's the feeding of the 5,000, if you have a heading above chapter 6. So I'm sure most of us are familiar with this story, but it teaches us something about Philip. And what we see about Philip in this text, beginning in verse 1, is that Philip, he overanalyzed things. So look with me at John chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, where it says this: "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?' But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?'" We'll pick up and read the rest of the story here in a moment, but I want us to highlight what happened to Philip here. I want us to think about what was going on in Philip's heart and his life. Jesus used this situation to test Philip. It seems from this text and from other texts that maybe Philip was the one who got things organized. He was the detail guy. We don't know that for sure, but it's not a leap of an assumption to take that conclusion, because it seems like, we know Judas held the money. He held the purse, as it were. And Philip was the one who got things organized. He was the details guy. And so as the detail guy, as the organizer, Jesus wanted to ask him a question. Now, there's a great multitude of people. We read later that there were 5,000 men in this group. And so some people would say, well, how did they know? Well, later on, Jesus had them divide themselves up into groups of 50 and 100, which would be very easy to count how many were there. There were 5,000 just men. And when you add in women and children, potentially, there'd be a lot more than that. It's coming to the end of the day. They've listened to Jesus' teaching for hours, And Jesus wants to use this situation as a test because he knows the people are hungry. And so in the other accounts of this, actually this miracle is recorded in every single gospel. It's one of the only ones that's recorded in all the gospels. Some of the disciples say, let's send all these people away. Let's get them out of here. It's not our problem. Let's have them deal with their own problems and feed themselves. But what Jesus does is he uses this as a test for Philip, and he says, what do you think we should do, Philip? Where can we buy bread to feed all these people? And so you start to see Philip doing the math. And actually, it's possible that Philip already was doing the math. The way that Philip answers the question, it seems like he had already calculated it all out. He was the numbers guy. He was a mathematician. And so he says, well, not even 200 denarii worth of bread would feed all these people, just a little bit. A denarius was a day's wages in the Roman Empire. And so, based on the numbers, Philip says, even if we had 6.5 months worth of wages, we couldn't even feed all these people just a little bit. And that's just if you have the money in hand. Where are you going to get the food from? And so you kind of see Philip worrying about the situation. He seems like he's wringing his hands. This is an insurmountable problem. We can't fix it. There's nothing we can do, humanly speaking, to take care of this issue. My dad has used this phrase before. It's not original with him, but he's here actually this morning if you want to say hi after the service. I heard him say one time, paralysis by analysis. That's Philip. He was analyzing the situation, doing the math, crunching the numbers, and it just didn't add up. The math wasn't mathing, as people say. And so Jesus wants to test Philip. He wants him to think about the situation and to add it all up in his mind. Now, it's interesting to compare what Philip does to Andrew. We already looked at Andrew, the disciple, and what he did here. He brought a young boy to Jesus who had a little bit of food. Andrew is a problem solver, and he's trying to figure it out, trying to solve the problem. And as he normally does in the Gospels, he brings someone to Jesus, just a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But then Andrew has doubts too and says, but what are they among so many? This problem of paralysis by analysis is something that we see often in the Bible. Philip wasn't the only one. If you look in the Old Testament, you'll see that God gave Israel the promised land. He freed them from Egypt. He sent the 10 plagues. He opened the Red Sea. He walked them through the wilderness, guided them with the pillar of fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. He fed them manna in the wilderness. And they come to the border of Israel, and God says, go in. Go take it. And they say, well, hold on a second. Let's send in some spies. So they send in the spies, and the spies come back. 10 were bad and 2 were good. You guys know the story. And the people doubted. They analyzed the situation. Yeah, it was a beautiful land. It had much crops, and it was bounteous and plenteous. But they said, but there's giants in the land. Now, don't go putting on your tinfoil hat and think, okay, giants like Jack and the Beanstalk type stuff. Okay, these are people who didn't have the kind of nourishment and vitamins that we have today, and we're probably a lot shorter than we are. The average height wasn't as high as it is today. And so a person that's like Shaquille O'Neal's size, to them would be a giant. Even in today's time, that's a giant. And they say they're well fortified. We just can't do it. We don't know what we're doing. And so they just quit and they give up. Imagine if David had done that when he went up against Goliath. In fact, that's what all the other soldiers of Israel were doing. That's what the king of Israel, King Saul, was doing. He was overanalyzing the situation and giving up. And all of this points to the fact that those people, as well as Philip, had little faith. But in all of Philip's calculations, he forgot to factor in one thing. What's that? Jesus. He neglected to remember that Jesus was there. And as we read through the rest of the story, we see that Jesus, he solves the problem. It says in verse 10, John chapter 6, verse 10, "Then Jesus said, 'Make the people sit down.' Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, 'Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost.' Therefore, they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, 'This truly is the prophet who is to come into the world.'" So that's not the first time that we see John talk about Philip. We also see John tell a story about Philip in John chapter 12. So let's turn to John chapter 12 and let's see another scenario in Philip's life. John chapter 12, and we'll look just at a couple verses there in verse 20. In the first scene, we see that Philip overanalyzed, and in this scene, we see that Philip is going to overcomplicate things. It says in John chapter 12, verse 20, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.' Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus." It's not a very long story. It's not a very detailed scene, but it does communicate a lot to us. Some have questioned, why would these Greek people come to Philip? Why would they ask Philip? Well, Philip is one of the only disciples who has just a Greek name. It seems like every other disciple has a Jewish-sounding name. And in those days, there were some Jews who were Hellenized. They call it Hellenization. That's just a fancy way of saying they had become influenced by the Greek culture. Before the Roman Empire was the Greek Empire. When the Greek Empire took over Israel, some people resisted the culture, and they refused to take on Greek names, to take on Greek clothing and Greek culture and customs. But some of the Jews did accept the Greek culture, and Philip, it seems like, came from a family that was very accepting of the Greek culture. In fact, he has a Greek name. So it could be that these Gentiles, these Greeks, came to Philip because of that. They knew his name, and they figured that he was kind of a go-between, and he would understand them and take them in. But instead of immediately taking these Gentiles who wanted to know more about Jesus, instead of immediately taking them to Jesus and being that liaison, he hesitates. He's like, I don't know. What do I do? He overcomplicates the situation. He first goes to Andrew. We saw this a couple weeks ago. And he talks to Andrew about, what do we do about this? We don't know exactly why Philip hesitated, but I think it's because he had little faith. Again, in those days, Jewish rabbis did not interact with Gentiles very often. In fact, most Jewish rabbis would not even speak to Gentiles. They had no interactions with them. They kept to themselves. And so maybe Philip thought, well, maybe Jesus is just like every other rabbi. Maybe Jesus is just like every other religious leader in Israel. Maybe I should just push these people aside. But before he does, he goes to Andrew, and thankfully, Andrew takes them and Philip to Jesus. Now, there's a third scenario in Philip's life. It's found just in a couple chapters later than this, John chapter 14. So flip over to John chapter 14 with me. In the first scene, we see that Philip overanalyzed. The second, we see he overcomplicated. In this scene, we see he overlooked. This is a very important scene in the story of Jesus and his disciples. It's the Last Supper. And it says in John chapter 14, verse 1, Jesus is speaking again. He says, "Let not your heart be troubled." Just with that first line alone, we get a sense of what's going on. Jesus is concerned for his disciples. He loves them. He knows he's about to go to the cross. He knows they're about to experience some traumatic events. And so he wants to comfort them. He wants to prepare them. And so notice what he says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also, and from now on you know him and have seen him." And Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us." And Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" I think this really peels the layers back on Philip's heart more than any other story about Philip in the Bible. Again, remember the scene. This is the Last Supper. Listen to the words of Jesus. Listen to his concern and his care and his teaching. He loves his disciples. He wants to encourage them. He wants to uplift them. He wants to strengthen them. He cares for them. And what does Philip say? "Jesus, can we see the Father now?" Hey, hello, McFly, Philip, wake up. Read the room, Philip. What is your problem, bro? Oftentimes we like to look at Peter and Philip and other disciples and say, what is their problem? Why don't they get it? But to be honest with you, many of us struggle with faith just like Philip did. Many of us have problems and we have little faith. I'm going to be transparent with you this morning. I'm a man of little faith. I look at Philip and see very similar struggles in my heart. We just had a business meeting last Sunday, and we talked about the roof. 3 years ago, when I first came here, well, it wasn't exactly 3 years ago. It was about 2.5 years ago when I first came here. After being here for a couple months, it came to my attention that we have some major roof problems. Maybe you've seen some of the leaks that were over there. We had some roofers come in, and you know how roofers are. They don't have exactly the greatest bedside manner. They're construction guys, They just want to be blunt and give you the facts. And so they stopped in and they were like, "Man, your roof is in bad shape. It's in real bad shape. You got all kinds of problems." They started pointing out the problems. And I'll be honest with you, 2.5 years ago, I started doing what Philip was doing. I started doing the math. I started looking at the budget. I started looking at our savings. I started worrying, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? This is a big deal. Like, if we have a bunch of leaks, we're going to get mold. And then what happens when we get mold? There becomes infection. And I have a friend, actually, who had a mold problem in his church. And they literally had to tear every piece of drywall out of their worship center. And it was a nightmare. They had to find another place to meet for months on end. And I'm having all these thoughts and all these struggles and all these worries. And so I just want to tell you, as your pastor, I get it. I, as far as Philip goes, I'm a man of little faith too. Now, for you, it might not be a roof problem. For you, it might be something else. Maybe it's a bill. Maybe it's a medical bill. Maybe it's you're looking for a job and it just seems like nobody's hiring right now. Maybe it's a relational issue that you're having with somebody else. And it just seems like it can't get fixed. It's insurmountable. And just like Philip, you have little faith. And so as we continue in our sermon this morning, I want us to think about how can we grow our faith. How could Philip have done a better job? How could his faith gone from little to much? Well, there's three things that I think Philip could have done, and I think we can learn for our own hearts when we struggle with faith. Number one, remember what Jesus did. Remember what Jesus did. Think back to the feeding of the 5,000. John chapter 6. You don't have to turn there, but in verse 2 it says, "Then a great multitude followed Jesus because they saw his" what? "Signs, which he performed on those who were diseased." If you know anything about the Gospel of John, if you've ever done any study in it, you'll know that John likes to record different miracles of Jesus. Most Bible studies will talk about the 7 signs of John. John describes 7. Actually, I believe there's 8, but I don't want to get into a fight this morning. So the first one is found in chapter 2. Jesus turns water into wine at the wedding of Cana. The second one is found in John chapter 4, where Jesus heals a nobleman's son. The nobleman comes to Jesus and he says, "My son is sick." And Jesus tells him to go home. "Your son is healed." Remotely, from the place that he's at, Jesus heals this man's son. And they do the math and they come to figure out the moment that Jesus told the man to go back home, that was the moment that the son became healed. And now we have, after that, there's the third sign in John, which is the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5. And if you've read that story, you know that this man had been paralyzed for 38 years. He had been just sitting there on the sidewalk, as it were, waiting for a miracle to occur for 38 years, and Jesus, in an instant, heals him. The man didn't need any therapy. He didn't need any casts on his legs. He didn't need to use crutches. He just immediately, his muscles grew back, the bones grew back, the sinews grew back. And the man was healed. Philip should have remembered that. Philip should have remembered what Jesus did. He should have connected the dots. He should have said, when he saw all those people, "There's a lot of people here. And we only have 200 denarii of money." But he should have said, "But Jesus is here." What about you? What about me? Do we forget what Jesus has done? I haven't been a pastor. I've been a pastor longer than just here. I've served in other ministries. And I can tell you, God's done some amazing things in my ministry. When I was serving, I'm really tired, so when I get tired, I get choked up. When I was serving in Illyria, our Christian school. It was going to be closed. And God saved it. Another time we were there, we were in debt $1 million. We had a mortgage of $1 million. Guess what? That mortgage was paid off. I could tell you story after story. Just like that. Paul Tripp is a great author. I'd recommend you read his books. In one of his books, he talks about spiritual amnesia. Often, we as Christians, that's what we struggle with. We forget. We forget what God has done in our hearts. We forget our past. We forget the miracles that He's performed in our lives. And if we want to grow in our faith, we have to remember what Jesus did. Number 2, if you want to grow in your faith, you need to remember what Jesus said. In the second scene, when the Greeks come to Philip and they say, "We want to see Jesus," Philip should have remembered what Jesus had said. What did Jesus say? He said, "I came to seek and to save those who were lost." Instead of having doubts, instead of hesitating, instead of struggling, instead of worrying, he should have remembered why Jesus said He came to the world. I've come to save those who are lost. Have you forgotten what Jesus said? When you have doubts, when you struggle in your faith like Philip, take God's Word and read it. Study it. I've been through some hard times in my life, and it's God's Word that's gotten me through. It's God's promises that have helped me. One of my former teachers, one of my high school English teacher, I remember when her mom was passing. She was on hospice care, and I went to the hospital to see her, and my English teacher was there. And I asked her how she was doing, and she said, "You know what? I'm really focusing on the promises of God right now." And she talked about how she had heard a pastor do a series called Always True. And it was focusing on the promises of God, how these things, these promises, these truths, no matter what you see, no matter what you face, they are always true. Have you and I forgotten what Jesus said? And the last thing we can do to grow our faith is this: remember who Jesus is. Remember who Jesus is. When Philip was there at the Last Supper and he was listening to Jesus speak, he should have remembered the man that was standing right there in front of him who was teaching. This is God in the flesh. This is the God-man. He should have remembered all the things that Jesus had done, the miracles and what it proved and what it showed and what it revealed about this man. He was no mere mortal. He was God in the flesh. When we get in situations of doubt, when we have little faith, we need to remember who our God is. Our God is omnipotent. Our God is omniscient. Our God is omnipresent. Our God is everlasting. Focus on the theology of God. Focus on the truth of God, the identity of who God is. And when we look at our problems like Philip did, We look at the 5,000 people that need to be fed. We can say, you know what? The Lord provides. God can fix this. Jesus is here, and he can solve the problem. So this morning, I don't know if you're struggling with faith like I do, but I can tell you that if you're not doing it, if you're not struggling with it right now, you will in the future. And when you get into those situations, I want you to do what Philip should have done. Remember what Jesus has done in the past, in your life, in others' lives. Remember what he has said. Take time to read his word and remember who he is. Don't have spiritual amnesia. Don't forget. Remember and reflect on these things. And when you do, it will help you to grow in your faith. Now, as I close, I just want to say one thing. Skeptics will say that faith is foolish. Faith is a dumb thing to have because they think that faith is just hope so. Like, maybe this might happen, and it makes no sense to them. But when we have our faith in the right object, then we know that things will work out. If you have faith in the government, it's not going to work out. If you have faith in your job, that's going to fail you. But you need to have your faith in the right object. God is all powerful. Again, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. And when you have your faith in the right object, your trust, then you know that, as we sang earlier, he will never fail. So take heart this morning. I hope this has been an encouragement to your heart and that it has prepared you to face the challenges of the week ahead, the month ahead, and the year ahead. Let's close in prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the way that you worked in Philip's heart and life, for the way that you strengthened his faith, that you grew his faith, and we ask that you would help us. When we face these challenges, we ask that you'd help us to have faith. Help us to remember these things. Help us to not forget these truths. And we thank you that you are there for us through it all. In Jesus' name.